It is a little after 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming out today. It's really great to see everyone here, and I was just telling Hannah that it's great to be back on the UC campus. I used to teach a class here to the MBA students a few years ago, but I haven't probably been back really since. So it's nice to see you all, and I'm from Charleston, so speaking to Charleston schools is my first love. So I'm here to talk to you today about what your first boss wants you to know. And let me just get a lay of the land of the audience here. How many of you are undergrads? How many of you are in internships or actively looking for a job right now? Okay. And then I assume the rest of you are graduate students. Raise your hand if you're graduate students, pharmacy schools. I'm seeing that. Okay. All right. So let me ask you a question. Why do you think I used this image for this title slide? What do you think that means? Yes, ma'am.
Just because, like, in the beginning, when you get a job, you don't really know what you're fully getting yourself into until you get it, and then it all comes together.
Mm-hmm. So it all comes together. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Any other guesses? That's right. Any other guesses as to why I would have used this image? Harry, you have anything?
Sure. Because you've got different people coming from different directions and you want to end up being a rope.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in college to career transition for about 10 years. And one of the things that I hear from employers all the time, particularly about students today, is we love your energy. We love the enthusiasm you bring to the workforce. Now, how can we take that and integrate it into an established work team? And that is a big challenge for employers, and it's a big challenge for you as employees coming into companies, because you want to bring your energy, you want to bring your ideas, you want to bring your innovation, but at the same time, respect the established norms that are within the organization where you're working. So I want to tell you very quickly how I got started, how I got interested in the college to career transition. And it was here in Charleston, West Virginia. When I graduated, I went to work for a marketing agency here, and this is my first boss, Skip Linneberg. And after working really hard, overtime, really busting myself for a full year working in that job, I went into my very first performance review with Skip, fully expecting to get a raise and a promotion, right? Because we are entitled to a raise and a promotion after 12 months, right? Or so we think. So he said something that I'll never forget. He said, Emily, here's the thing. It's like, I like you, and I appreciate the fact that you're working hard. The problem is, I can't give you a raise, and I can't give you a promotion, because no one on your team respects you. Now, that was not a good day. So I was dumb enough to get myself in that situation, but I was smart enough to know that I needed to get out of it and fast. And so I said to him, I was like, okay, so there's clearly something I'm not getting here. So the next time that I'm behaving in some way that you feel undermines the reputation that I want to create here, I would love it if you pulled me aside and told me. And so for a good year to a year and a half, every time that I would do something, he would pull me aside and just very coaching, mentoring way, tell me how I could improve. And all the lessons that he shared with me are in the book that you have in front of you. But there's one that there's a couple that I want to share with you in particular. I want to talk to you about what it takes to be a remarkable leader of yourself, because you can't lead other people until you're a remarkable leader of yourself, right? And that's what I missed. That is what I missed, and that's why no one on the team respected me. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about remarkable leadership and how you can be the remarkable leader that employers expect of you from day one. So you come into the workforce with that skill. And that's a highly prized skill, as you would imagine, from employers these days. So does anybody know who this is on the slide here? This is my remarkable leader. This is Antoinette Tuff. Antoinette Tuff is a bookkeeper in an elementary school in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, why am I highlighting a bookkeeper from an elementary school? So in a tragic scene that has become all too familiar in this country. One day last fall, a deranged gunman walked into her elementary school. He had 500 rounds of ammunition, and there were 800 children in that school. The only thing that stood between him and accomplishing what it was that he set out to do was this woman right here. So she talked him down from the ledge. She prevented a massacre at her elementary school. And as you would imagine, after that situation, she had news reporters from around the world asking her, how were you able to do that? What were you able to do in that moment that convinced this guy who came in to cause such harm to stop in his tracks? What did you do? And you know what she said? She said, well, I practice what I call anchoring. And that is where I center into my core strength, and then I allow compassion and kindness to guide my behavior. So I want to talk to you about that, because I think that when we talk about what it means to be a remarkable leader, being anchored really is number one. But I've been fortunate in my career to speak to thousands of employees and hundreds of employers, and that's not the only thing that it takes to be a remarkable leader. It is certainly at the top, but there's some other things that are important too. So in addition to being anchored, you have to be cool. And what I mean by cool is that you're responding to challenges versus reacting to them. Because when you react to challenges versus respond to them, we have what we call scattered energy, right? So when you're that person who has that frantic scattered energy, then other people pick up on that. They respond with their scattered energy, and when you both have scattered energy, nothing's going to get accomplished, right? Third thing is they have to be wise, and what I mean by wise is that they're trusting their own intuition, their own inner wisdom versus engaging with their own inner critic, right? Nothing sets us off the path, the spinning mind, faster than engaging with our inner critic. And the third is that they're inspiring. And what I mean by inspiring is that they motivate other people versus just managing them. These are the areas where I fell down when I first entered the workforce. And if you get all of these right, then you become a remarkable leader. And what I mean by remarkable leader is that you become somebody that other people want to follow because they're compelled to follow you versus just being compliant, right? So this is the core of leadership. This is the bottom line of leadership. This is how you build influence from day one. Now, unfortunately, this isn't how a lot of us come into the workforce. And this isn't how a lot of us maintain ourselves, even if we're seasoned employees. What's more common than having that calm, anchored presence is having what I call a snow globe mind. What do you think I mean by a snow globe mind?
Unorganized or blurring around.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a mind that is like a shaken snow globe. Now, how do you think that you're going to be affected if you have a mind that's like a shaken snow globe? So what I want to talk to you about is what specifically you can do to calm that snow of your own mind down so that you can be in charge of your own mind versus the other way around. So the mind is like a muscle, right? You know, we know that if we don't work ourselves out, if we don't work out our bodies, we get flabby muscles. The mind is the same way. If you don't actively find ways to control what's going on upstairs, you get flabby attitudinal muscles. And the fastest way to derail your career is to have flabby attitudinal muscles. So when I say flabby attitudinal muscles, what I mean is reacting versus responding. So why do we do that? Why do we get into situations where we react versus respond? And there's two things that I want to talk to you about related to that. The first is we get stuck in fight or flight. This is, without question, one of the things that caused me so much trouble in the first year of the workforce. One of the things that really damaged my reputation very, very quickly. So when I say fight or flight, let me talk to you about how this happens. So I think it's pretty common knowledge that the left side of our brain controls more logic and reason-based functions, and the right side of our brain controls more feeling or intuitive-based functions. But if I were to ask you to, if I were to ask you to reach up and touch your forehead, spanned across both sides of your brain is what's known as the prefrontal cortex. This is really important because if your body was a company, the prefrontal cortex would be the board of directors. This is where your problem solving and decision making happens. Now, when you're under stress, the body reads stress as danger. So what happens is when you're under stress, your body releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that are pumping through your body, and if they're elevating your heart rate, they make your face red. You know, when you're in a situation where you're just really frustrated, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're really mad at somebody else, something has triggered you, and your face gets red and your heart starts pounding? That is your body under stress, which it's reading as danger. Now, what's going on as the adrenaline and cortisol is pumping through your body is it's sending blood to major muscle groups like your arms and your legs to prepare you to hit or run. This is fight or flight. This is fabulous when you're being attacked by a grizzly bear. This is not so good when you're in the office trying to establish a good reputation, right? So the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because when you understand what's going on biologically in your body, when you have these symptoms of danger or stress, you can understand that it's just your body trying to protect you, and you don't necessarily have to act on it, right? So when are we in those situations where we behave in ways that we don't want to? So you look back on something and you say, why did I do that? That wasn't me. Why did I react that way? Why did I say that, right? So you regret it later, you look back on it. One of the reasons why you said those things is because you were in that state of fight or flight. You were in that heightened emotional state, and you just said whatever came out, right? Versus stepping back, observing your own behavior and saying, how do I really want to act in this situation? Let me just tell you one other thing while I'm on the topic of biology. Women have it a little bit tougher in this regard than men because there is a hormone that both men and women have called prolactin. And what prolactin is it's a tear trigger. It's basically what signals to your body like it's time to cry. Women have 6 times as much prolactin in our bodies as men do in theirs. We also have tear ducts that are twice as large, which explains why women tend to gush tears and men tend to trickle. So once again, I do not share this with you as an excuse to be emotional in the office. I share this with you because I know, I speak for myself, but I used to beat myself up about wearing my emotions on my sleeve at work because I thought that I was less equipped for leadership roles as a result. And when I learned this, it was a huge hallelujah moment because what I realized is that I wasn't less equipped. I was just hardwired differently. And so once I understood that, then it was a huge release of a mental block for me. So I hope it serves you too. So can you see why, I mean, is this making sense? Can you see why the fight or flight response enables you to behave poorly or it causes you to behave poorly, and then you say and do things that undercut your reputation, right? Do you see how this works? And so when you have that heightened state, that adrenaline and cortisol response, the heart's pounding, face is getting red, right? You know what to do now. I'm going to go deeper into what to do, but I just want to point out the biology of it. The second reason why we react emotionally versus respond strategically is we get what I call stuck on the ladder. Now, when I say stuck on the ladder, what I'm talking about is the ladder of inference. Are any of you familiar with the ladder of inference? This isn't my tool. This is a pretty popular psychological tool. Anybody familiar with this? Okay, good. So when I say inference, what I mean is to leap to conclusions, right? So when we infer something, we take action based on an assumption. This is what gets us in trouble tremendously in our own lives and especially at work. So let me just walk you through an example based on one of my clients of how the ladder of inference works. So what happens is something happens. We have an experience. In the case of my client, she was walking to a business meeting and a gentleman that she worked with, who she had fairly contentious relationships with, avoided eye contact with her, even though he said hi to someone else who was around her, okay? That's all that happened. That's it. Seems pretty benign, right? That's all that happened. From that, she selected the data. She pulled out the fact that he didn't make eye contact with her, okay? She added meaning to that. He must be mad. He must be mad. If he didn't make eye contact with me, he must be mad. She drew a conclusion. Well, if he's mad at me, I'm mad at him. He's a jerk, right? Then she took action. And in that meeting, she sat there like this. So whenever he spoke, she avoided eye contact with him, like petty stuff, right? And I use this as an example because these are the types of things that happen in our lives, right? So we take something that is pretty mundane, right? What we call, we're down here at the bottom of the ladder, if we just dealt with the data of he didn't make eye contact with me and left it at that, and didn't come all the way up here where we're taking action based on assumptions of somebody else's behavior, when you're taking action from the top of the ladder, I guarantee you your action is less wise than it is if you just stay down here, stick with the facts, deal with the data. So this is why I love the ladder of inference as a tool, because it is a concrete framework for why we have emotional reactions in the first place. So when you understand this tool, you can say, am I adding meaning to something where meaning isn't there? So from an employer standpoint, from a just your own life standpoint, right? There's a good chance that every single one of you are walking around somewhere on that ladder about something. Now, from company standpoint, what happens when everybody's walking around on the ladder? What happens when everyone's taking action from an emotional place? That's what causes toxic business environments, toxic business cultures. So if you can come into the workplace and just deal with the data, stay down from the ladder, not putting piles of layers of judgment and emotion and meaning on top of normal things that happen, if you can just strip all that away, come into the workplace just dealing with the data, I guarantee you, you will be miles, miles ahead of other people that you work with, and perhaps people who've been there for a long time. So what I'm talking about here is, that's so shaky. Is that a train? What is that?
I don't know, unless somebody's like moving a cart around the stairs or something.
All right, I hope y'all don't get dizzy. But so what I'm talking about here is interrupting the story, right? So I guarantee you that there's something in your life that you're up on the ladder about. And so the idea is just to interrupt the story, to say, where am I on the ladder right now? Am I adding meaning to something where meaning doesn't need to be added? Am I taking something personal that isn't personal? And if you can just stop and recognize when you're on the ladder, it's so much easier to come down. And why are we trying to come down? Why do we want to be on the bottom of the ladder?
So our,
Overreact.
So we don't overreact, yeah?
our emotions won't take over and we could do something that could not be very good in the workplace.
Yeah.
Be fired.
Because, yeah, so you get fired. Because as the slide said before, you can't make good decisions if you're in a state of worry or anxiety or frenzy, right? That is the snow globe mind at work. You cannot make good decisions when you're in that place. You cannot make really good decisions when you're taking action from the top of the ladder. And so, what is the common denominator of good leadership? Good decisions.
Making informed decisions.
Yeah, good decisions. So if you can't make good decisions, if you're stuck in fight or flight, or if you're stuck on the ladder, and good decisions are the common denominator of being a remarkable leader of yourself and others, then you have to understand these tools if you want to advance in your career, period, point blank. So another one that I want to talk to you about real quick is this notion of projection making perception. Now this is very on the ladder stuff what I'm talking about here. And what I mean by projection making perception is that when we carry the past into the present, we program the future to look exactly as it does right now. Let me talk to you about what I mean by that, using the example of my coaching client. So when she noticed that the gentleman who she had had contentious relationships with in the past didn't make eye contact with her, then rather than just dealing with the facts of the situation as they were right then, she carried the past, oh, we haven't got along and he's been mad at me in the past. She carried that into the present, right? She brought that with her into the meeting, thereby programming the future to look exactly the same. So they didn't get along in the past. She brought that into the present, and her behavior as a result of that, being mean in the meeting, right, being petty in the meeting, programmed the future to look exactly the same. So she got mad at him for something he may not have even intended. She brought it into the present. She treated him poorly. What's he going to do with that? Huh? He's going to get on the ladder too. So he's going to add meaning to her behavior. He's going to treat her the same way that she's treating him. Thereby, the relationship stays the same. So when I talk about interrupting the story, right, somebody has to interrupt that story. Somebody has to stop that cycle. Otherwise, the behavior and the relationships will stay stuck right there. Somebody has to interrupt the story. When you don't interrupt the story, what happens is, it's like, I like to use the example of, it's like if I gave you a penny, okay? So every tiny little grievance that you carry around is like a penny. I give you a penny, I give you a penny. Now, if I just gave you one, it's no big deal. If I gave you two, no big deal. If I give you one every single day for a couple years, eventually, if I expected you to carry those around with you, or if you did carry those around with you, you would be weighed down by those things, right? This is baggage. This is how baggage works. Baggage is the old grievances, the old pennies, the old stuff that we carry around with us, and eventually it really does start to weigh us down. So then if we have enough baggage, then it starts to affect the relationships that are good, right? So we have so much stuff going on in our snow globe mind that even the relationships that we want to preserve end up falling by the wayside because we can't hold them. We're not strong enough internally to hold them, right? So this is how you derail your career. This is how you derail your relationships. And what is a career but a combination of your relationships? So when I talk about what it means to be effective, what it means to be remarkable, what it means to be a leader of yourself and others, when you're anchored, when you're cool, when you're wise, when you're inspiring, that's when you have that emotional grid that makes you available for solid relationships, elevation in your career. You're somebody who can hold that, right? When I talked before about your physical muscles and your attitudinal muscles, right? Like if I gave you a really big weight and you didn't have the physical muscles to hold it, you'd drop it. Same thing with your attitudinal muscles. If you don't have the strength to hold high-level relationships, high-level stuff that goes on in your world, you will fall, right? This is super, super important, not only coming into the workforce, but the higher you go in your career. Because the higher you go, the more complex the challenges become. So figure out how to deal with them now, and you'll have the self that will be able to hold your problems as they get more complex as you go up the ladder. So being cool, anchored, wise, and inspiring is the home zone, right? That's where we want to be. That's where we want to stay. And the way that you stay there is the act of bringing clarity and concentration to your moment-by-moment experience. When I say bringing clarity and concentration to your moment-by-moment experience, this is how you stay off the ladder. So you recognize that through clarity and concentration that you recognize when you're starting to get up the ladder, and it's only by that clarity and concentration do you even notice that you're going up the ladder, that you can even say, okay, I'm adding meaning, I'm taking this personal, now I need to bring it back down, right? Clarity and concentration in the moment. And the way that you do this is you see things that are happening as it is, as they are, not without all of that judgment and meaning that we can bring to it. Now, I want to give you an example here. I'm sure being in West Virginia, you guys have been whitewater rafting, right? No? Who hasn't been whitewater rafting? No, about half the room. That's surprising. You all should go. You're like an hour away from the best whitewater rafting on the East Coast. You should really go. So let me share a story with you about that, which may not make you want to go after I tell you. But so I used to work at a accounting firm here in town called Dixon Hughes Goodman, and I worked for a gentleman by the name of Roger Stewart, and he came in one Monday, and I asked him, how are you doing, Roger? And he said, well, I've had a rough weekend. What happened? He was whitewater rafting with his son. His son, I think, was about, I want to say like 11 or 12 at the time. And for those of you who have been rafting, you know that if the water is especially high, sometimes the guides will let you jump out of the boat and just ride a rapid in your life jacket. So they were the only two people to do that, Roger and his son, and the only people in their raft to do that. Well, it turns out the guide had completely underestimated how extreme the rapids were that day. And so Roger and his son were going through a rapid in their life vests that they really needed a boat for. And so what happened is Roger is not only trying to hold himself up above the water, but he's trying to hold his son up too, right? So it's just, it could have ended tragically. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this story with you is because it is a classic example of what's going on this slide. The ability to see what's happening as it is. How do you think that Roger would have been able to get through that rapid if in his mind he's thinking, holy cow, oh my God, we're gonna die, right? Probably not really well, right? So in that moment, he had to come back to a place where he's like, I'm not happy about this. We'll talk about it later with the guide. But in this moment, what do I have to do to survive? And what do I have to do to make sure that my son survives, right? So it is a strategic thinking, but it's also forward momentum, right? So when I say just deal with the moment as it's happening, that doesn't give you permission to not take action when you need to take action. It doesn't give you permission to sit around and be like, oh, everything's going to be cool, right? No, you take action, but you also come to a place of acceptance that this is where I am. I may not like it, I may not love it, but this is where I am. Now what? And the same skills that would get Roger through that rapid are the same skills that would help you in business. So, you guys understand that? Yeah? Any comments on that, Harry?
Question of that, Roger and his son are probably pumping through adrenaline like crazy.
Absolutely.
And how do they say, stop adrenaline, or how do they
They don't.
bypass it?
You don't. I mean, in that type of situation, in that type of situation, you don't. You can't, right? You don't have enough time.
Right.
When you're in the workforce, though, actually, that's a good segue. Let me just continue because I'm about to talk about that. So, the point is, regardless of what's happening, whether you're going down the rapid trying to save your son, or whether the printer's broken, or whether you've had some type of contentious relationship with someone, or whether whatever it is in the world that is triggering you right now, the facts of that situation don't change according to whether you're happy or unhappy about them. So once again, the question just becomes, what now? So I love this quote from Martin Luther King, where he says, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. And the reason why I'm including this quote in this presentation is because I think that if I'm talking to you about who it is that you're going to be when you show up in the world, right? For 10 years I've been doing this work, and so much of what I've talked about so far has been like, here's the type of resume that you need to have, and here's what you can do. This is a Friday memo that you can send to your boss, like really specific things that you can do. What I have learned is that you have to be somebody worth respecting before those things that you do matter, right? So you've got a whole book full of things that you can do. What I'm more concerned with is who are you being as you show up in the office? And to the point of this Martin Luther King quote, it's so easy to be the people that we want to be when things are going good, right? It's so easy to be that person when things are good, when we're working with people who think like us and act like us. So the real question becomes, who are you when they're not good? Who are you when you're surrounded by people who don't look like you or don't think like you, right? Who are you in those moments? And what I mean is who are you in the space, ultimately? Any of you familiar with the work of Stephen Covey? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? I knew you would be here. So in the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the best quotes in that whole book is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And it's in that space you choose how you wish to respond. And the way that you respond effectively, and we've already determined that great leadership is good decisions are responding effectively. The way that you respond effectively is you put some space between whatever triggers you and how you respond. And the way that you do that, to your question earlier, Harry, is conscious pausing. And what I mean by conscious pausing is when you take ownership of how you're going to respond. It's when you say, I have control over my behavior right now. I'm not just going to react in fight or flight. I'm not going to get up the ladder. I have some ownership in this. And you taking ownership is exactly what causes you to behave wisely. So the way that you do that is conscious pausing. And what you do in the conscious pausing is you ask yourself 4 questions. So this is specifically how you get down from the ladder. So the first question that you ask yourself is, what am I noticing right now? So when you say, for example, okay, I am so frustrated. I am so annoyed. I am so overwhelmed. I'm so mad. What am I noticing right now? You may notice that your heart's pounding. You may notice that your face is red. And you have the ability now to say, this is my body trying to protect me. This is me. This is my body saying you're stressed, you're in danger, doesn't mean that I have to act on these things. Second question is, can I make space for it? So where I think we go wrong is when we feel like because we're angry, because we're frustrated, because we feel overwhelmed, that we have to stuff those things and pretend like they don't exist. That is not true. All you have to do is make space for whatever it is that you're feeling. So if you say, I am so mad right now, that's okay. Just make space for it. Just make room for it. The third question is, can I touch this with kindness? So for example, if you have a situation with somebody else, and again, the reason why I'm focusing so much on your relationship with yourself and the relationship you have with other people is because that's what's going to get you where you want to go in your career. Your technicals, this is where I fell down my first year in the workforce. I thought that it was all about what I brought to the table. I thought it was all about my technical skills. I thought that if I was just good enough at my job, then I would get that raise and promotion. And what I learned, and what I'm hoping that I'm helping you guys avoid, is I recognize that old adage that great leaders don't have to claw their way to the top, they're carried there, right? What I learned very quickly was that it wasn't enough for me just to be good at my job. I had to have the support of my coworkers if I was going to get where it was that I wanted to go. And so the reason why this question is so important, can I touch the situation with kindness, is because you should not be talking to somebody else unless you're in a place where you have some sort of compassion for their behavior. Otherwise, they're not going to hear you. They're not going to hear you. So if you're not at a place where you can at least, you don't have to agree with it, but if you're not at a place where you can at least just appreciate why they may have done what they did, you're going to communicate in a way that has heightened emotional energy, and they're not going to hear you. They're not going to hear you. And if they don't hear you, then how effective is that conversation really going to be, right? Fourth question is, what is the next right action? So after you've come to a place where you've taken that pause between stimulus and response, you've recognized that you're triggered, right? You've recognized that you have some sort of stimulus that's causing you to some anxiety. Before you respond, you've asked yourself these 4 questions, and you come to a place where you know what the next right action will be, or at least you know what the next right step will be, and you're able to do it more wisely. Okay? Do you guys have any questions about this? Okay. If you can get through these 4 questions, I guarantee you that the action you take will be more wise. So here we are, back in pausing, which brings you to that home zone, okay? So even if you forget the questions, I mean, I totally understand that maybe, you know, when you're in a heightened situation, you're not gonna stop and be like, get through all these 4 questions. I get that. The idea is that the more you practice conscious pausing, the easier it becomes. So you may not get through all 4 questions, but even if you could just think to yourself, how do I get back into the home zone? then you'll be more certain than you would have otherwise. So I want to end for a little bit of time here. I want to end by talking to you about, in addition to all the things that I've just described about how to respond when you're under stress, those are very reactive behaviors, right? This is what you do when. So let's talk a little bit about how you can be proactive about who it is that you want to be when you come into the workplace. So one of the things that I've learned after all these many years of studying the snow globe mind and what causes it and how we can settle the snow is that the snow globe mind is caused by uncertainty. It's when we feel like the things that are happening around us are outside of our control. And I know that you guys are feeling that right now because the snow globe mind is highly triggered by where you are in your life right now because there's so many unknowns in your world. Where am I going to work? Who am I going to work for? Where am I going to live? Who's my partner, right? I mean, there's just all this stuff that you just don't have the answer to yet. So I imagine that it's causing you some anxiety. Now, the way that you can calm the snow globe mind down correlates with what I call management versus leadership drivers. So we spend so much time, and those of you who are in business classes know that we spend so much time focusing on management drivers. This is what quote unquote leadership is if you get these things done. If you get the strategies, if you get the goals, if you get the benchmarks, right? So we put our focus there. But what if we put our focus on things that don't change? Because goals go up and down, right? Strategies go up and down, benchmarks go up and down. So if you hook your self-worth on those things, which is what most popular culture tells you to do, then you're hooking your self-worth on things that go up and down. And so what that means is your emotional state will go up and down with those things, right? Based on whether you get them or whether you don't. So, what if you hooked your self-worth, if you hooked your self-confidence, if you hooked who it is that you want to be on leadership drivers, things like virtues, values, and principles? These are the things that don't change. So as the goals are going up and down, the virtues are the same. So when you attach who you want to be to those things, then regardless of what happens to you in your world, that stays pretty even keel. Now, coming into the workforce is like a frickin' fire hose to the face of information, of everything just coming at you, of expectations, of new people, new things, whatever, right? So it's a very up and down experience. So the way that you navigate that effectively is not by focusing here. I mean, obviously you need these things. Everybody needs goals, right? We'll talk about that here in a second. But focusing more here. Now let me give you a process for this. The big life. So the big life is short for virtues, intentions, and goals. So I want to just go up the ladder of the pyramid with you really quickly here. We all know that when something's at the bottom of the pyramid, it's there because it's the most important, not it's the least important. So when I say anchored, right, when I talked about Antoinette Tuff being anchored, what she was anchored into was this, virtues, your evergreen self. And when I say evergreen self, what I mean by that is that these are the things about you that do not change. These are the things that don't change regardless of season and don't change regardless of whatever else is happening in your world. So when I say virtues, what I mean is that these things are like your rock, right? So this rock, the waves come and beat up on this rock all day long, right? 24/7, but the rock itself doesn't move. And that's what you are when you're anchored into virtues instead of things that change. So regardless of whatever life circumstance hits you, because life circumstances, you guys have probably learned this, but if you don't, you will, life will hit you. And things won't go as you expect them to go. And sometimes it's incredibly painful. So if you focus on who it is that you want to be through that, then you're not going to have that scattered energy that I talked about before, right? Make sense? Okay. So just moving up the ladder here, intentions are who you are in the present. So intentions are the way that people know what your virtues are. So you don't have to walk around wearing a sandwich board of like, this is who I want to be, this is what matters most to me. Other people will know that based on how you act in the present moment. So for example, if one of your virtues was, let's say it was positivity, how are you showing up in the moment each day to underscore that? How would other people know that that's something that's important to you? So the point is, be intentional about who it is that you want to be. Put intentions in the space between stimulus and response, so that as you're taking that conscious pause, as you're asking yourself, what's going on right now, can I make space for this? You're thinking about who it is that you want to be in that moment. And I can't tell you who it is that you want to be. You have to define that for yourself. My point to you is only get clear on that. Because if you're not clear on who it is that you want to be, then you're probably going to respond to the triggers of your life in a way that you're going to regret. You know, again, spoken to a lot of employers and a lot of employees, and when I talk to employers and say, why do people who come, nobody hires somebody that they don't think is going to work out, right? They interview 100 people and they hire one, and then that one failed. Why is that, right? When all of the recruiting process was set up to make sure that that person succeeded, why did they fail? And when I ask employers that, one of the things they say is that it's not that they weren't smart. We don't hire people that aren't smart. It's that they weren't intentional. They weren't intentional about who it was that they wanted to be. And so when the triggers of life happened, they became unzipped. They became unzipped. Understanding who it is that you want to be, so you can say, am I in alignment with that, or am I out of alignment with that? Am I in? Am I out? How would you know if you're in or you're out if you don't know who it is that you want to be? And not very many people do. So, at the top of the pyramid here is goals. Now, I have a super love-hate relationship with goals, as you probably can guess. I totally recognize that we need goals because goals are what paint the vision, right? Goals are, there's nothing of significance that you will achieve in this world that won't come with challenge, that won't come with struggle, that won't come with obstacles, that won't come with strife. And what the beauty of the goal is that if the vision that you have is clear enough, then that becomes what motivates you to get over those mountains along the way. So Effective Immediately, for example, was a book that I thought was going to take 2 years to write and get out in the market, and it took 7. And the only reason why I was able to sustain my dream to have that book published was the vision of this right now. Talking to students with the book in front of them, right? That was a clear goal in my head. And so it was enabled me to sustain that 5 years, which really did feel like the wilderness until it actually happened. So I totally get goals. My point to you is that, once again, if you hook your success, your version of success, based on whether you do or don't get the goal, that process is designed to ensure that you are never satisfied. You know why? Because the goal is outside of yourself. And if you focus on things that are outside of you, those are things that are outside of your control, and that's what causes the snow globe mind, right? So when you hook your focus on goals, then one of 2 things happens. You either get the goal and the bar gets higher, right, which is inherently unsatisfying, or you don't get the goal and you feel like a loser, which is also unsatisfying, right? Goals change. So you have to hook into something that doesn't change. So the way that I like to think about the big pyramid is to spend 80% of your time focusing on everything that's below this line. Who it is that you want to be and how you show up in alignment with that. And what happens as a result of that is somewhat outside of your control, right? So it's also, it's outside of your control, but whether or not you achieve the goal tomorrow is based on how you behave today, right? So it doesn't serve you to spend your mental energy spinning about tomorrow when what you could be doing is focusing on the behaviors that you can take today that's going to get you that goal tomorrow. Y'all with me? Any questions? Y'all are super low energy. Come on, help me. Questions? Okay. Yes?
Question. If you're doing a resume, you see many of them that say, I'm a goal-oriented person. And the belief is that employers want to see somebody who is goal-oriented. How do you convey to them that you may be an intentions-oriented person, which results in good goals?
Yeah. Well, I think that you have to have a deep, that's a great question, Harry, and I think that you have to have a deep understanding of this process because you can't get too hooked into either one, right? So if you're too far down here, then it's just like, oh, well, whatever happens, it'll happen, and that's ultimately not going to get you where you want to go. But you can't be so far up here that you're focusing on what happens tomorrow at the expense of your behavior today, right? So that's where I messed up, as I mentioned in my first performance review, is I was so focused on raise and promotion, raise and promotion, raise and promotion, that I forgot that how I engaged with everyone around me in the 364 days before my performance review is what mattered most, right? So I think that if you are doing an interview and you come into that interview and tell your potential employer that you have a clearly defined virtues and intentions. Here's who I want to be, and here's how I intend to show up in alignment with that every day. That's super impressive. And I'm telling you this as somebody who used to do recruiting interviews. Nobody, not one person came with that. They all knew what it was they wanted to do and where it was they wanted to go, but nobody flipped that upside down on its head like this. And that would have been more impressive.
Thank you.
So, I've got like a couple minutes left. Let me just tell you really quickly that if you forget everything if you walk out the door and you forget everything that I've just said, like if you're like, I know that Emily talked about 4 questions, but I don't know what they were. I know she talked about a ladder, but I don't remember what the steps of that ladder was, right? I want you to remember this. Every single interaction that you have with other people, whether it's online or off, is a touch point. And by touch point, I mean it's a chance to make an impression. The sum total of your touch points, and they add up super quick, is your reputation. And the reason why this is really important, particularly for your career, is that 99.9% of the time, the decisions that affect the trajectory of your career, including whether or not you get hired, happen when you are not in the room. They happen when you're not even there. You're going to go to career fairs, you're going to go to your interviews. When you're after you get hired, you're going to have performance reviews. The company that you work for, the people who do those interviews are going to go and huddle, and they're going to talk about you, right? And you think that you have no control over that conversation because you're not there. But that's not true. If you manage your touch points, you have more control over that conversation than you think. And let me tell you, in that conversation, as somebody who sat through dozens of them, they're going to talk for 1 minute about what it is that you can do. They're going to talk for, maybe in the hiring process, they'll talk for 2 minutes about what's on your resume, but most of the time, they're going to talk about who you are. And if you're clear on that, then once again, you have more control over that conversation than you might think, even though you're not in the room. So I want to end with this, because I've talked a lot about the snow globe mind and what you can do to settle the snow globe mind. And if you settle the snow globe mind, we would call that being in a state of peace. Now, peace, as this quote says, doesn't mean that you're in a place where there's no trouble, noise, or hard work. It just means that you can be amid those things. You can stand in those waves, the waves of life, and still be calm in your heart. And when you are calm, you are anchored. You are just like I was talking about with Antoinette Top. You are somebody that, God forbid, you never have to go through something like what she went through. But whatever you go through in your own life, you're able to navigate it effectively because you are anchored, cool, wise, and inspiring in your home zone. I think we've got about 5 minutes for questions, if you guys have any. Any questions?
What tips do you have for students, say, in their first 60 days of work? What are like the top 3 things they should be doing? Because when you start your first job, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's hard to stay balanced and keep that mindset because you've got so many things thrown at you. What are the top 3 things they should sort of prioritize and say, this is what I need to establish right now?
So I'll give you 2 that are my favorite, and they're my 2 favorite chapters in Effective Immediately. One is called Gene Kelly Dance Steps, and the other is called Friday Memos. So Gene Kelly Dance Steps. Harry, I know you know Gene Kelly. Anybody else know Gene Kelly here? Okay. So really quickly, I'll tell you that Gene Kelly was a famous singer and dancer in the days of Hollywood when a lot of movies were musicals. But the cool thing about Gene Kelly was that he wasn't the best singer and he wasn't the best dancer. What made Gene Kelly appear to be the best was that he had the details right. He had the creased pants, he had the nice cane, he had the hat, the crisp shirt, right? And all of those little things added up to make him seem like the best. And it's the same thing with you in your career. The little things are the things that we tend to overlook when we come in because we're trying to score the home run assignments. So when I say little things, I mean illities. So it's punctuality, humility, accountability, responsibility. All of those little, tiny little illities add up to the big illity, which is credibility, right? So focus on the little things because little things are actually big. The second tip that I would give you is to send your boss every Friday what we call a Friday memo. This is not something that I made up. This came from Skip, who was required to do this when he worked for GE. It was a email to your boss with 3 things. The email is in bulleted format. It should take you less than 10 minutes to create because if it gets too wordy, nobody will read it and you won't want to do it and it'll be a drag. This is a super quick, when I say 10 minutes, I mean 10 minutes. It is, the first bullet is your accomplishments for that week, things that you got done. The second bullet is areas where you need input. So sometimes we hold on projects because we're waiting on information. Meanwhile, other people think we're just not doing it, right? So areas where you need input. And then the third bullet is goals for the week ahead. And the beautiful thing about this Friday memo is that it not only keeps you visible with your boss, right? So it keeps that channel of communication open, but the accomplishments is obviously a highlight. But the goals for the week ahead will become super important because a lot of times, particularly when we're new, the things that we think are important, the things that are at the top of our high priority, aren't necessarily the top of your boss's priority list. And so just that act of, here's what I'm planning on working on for the week ahead, will cause some dialogue and interaction with your boss where he or she says, oh, you know what, we're going to work on that press release, but what I'd really like you to work on is da-da-da, right? So, minding your illities and Friday memo. I know you asked for 3, but those are the. And you know, if I were to say a third, and it's to get your big together, because I know that maybe you came into this presentation hoping that I would give you like a checklist of like every little thing that you needed to know to do. But I promise you that figuring out who you want to be is so much more important. The state of your being precedes the state of your doing. And if you don't have it right up here, your actions will follow suit. I promise you. That's why I've delivered this presentation in this way. And I used to do the checklist, and it doesn't serve you as well, I promise. Any other questions?
What's your big?
That's a great one. I have it printed in my book that says it's a man's world, but I have 11 virtues. So I'll just give you a couple of them. Positivity is definitely one. Mindfulness is huge for me. Family is on my big list, and the reason why I listed family as a virtue is because the way that I look at this list is the filter through which I judge my behaviors. And so, for example, when I'm upstairs on Twitter and my son is downstairs watching SpongeBob, I'm able to go through that filter of, am I in or out of alignment with who I want to be right now? No, I should probably hang out with my kid. So the important thing isn't necessarily what mine are, is what are yours? And as you create them, and I hope that you do, that what you list becomes, how do I know if I'm in or I'm out of it, right? It won't work for you unless it's practical. And that's the most practical, grounded thing you can do to establish the reputation that you want to establish that will get you where you want to go in your career. Okay, thanks guys.